on data that's been published by the National Renewable Energy Labs. Actually show that Ohio, in some ambitious scenarios, could be hitting as high as 40% of your overall mix from renewable sources of power. And if you achieved that, it would create 100,000 construction jobs. It's about $5 billion in wages and benefits. Over the long term, that's 6,000 jobs in operations and maintenance, $400 million in tax revenue, $50 million in leases to farmers and landowners. So significant economic development potential for the state if you pursue renewables aggressively. We were excited to see those findings in our report. We also profiled a series of renewable energy success stories in the state of Ohio, which we think kind of capture not only what's available today, but also what's possible into the future. So we profiled the Ohio State University's purchase of 50 megawatts of wind, which I won't talk any more about because my colleague Dan's going to talk about. But it's a just fantastic story of, largest university in the state making the largest investment by, I think, any higher ed institution in renewable electricity. Other major purchasers that we profile in our report, General Motors and Honda in particular, the auto manufacturing industry in Ohio is investing heavily in renewable energy. In the case of GM and their Toledo facility, they're saving $40,000 a year because of their investment in solar of a 1.8 megawatt solar array. In the case of Honda, they've installed 2 wind turbines on site at their manufacturing facility, and that delivers about 13% of the factory's total energy load. So I think what our report should illustrate is that renewable energy right now is a source of reliable power, affordable power. It's one that's creating jobs for the state, but that there's significant opportunity to do a lot more, and that would have serious economic development impacts and potential for the state. So happy to answer your questions. Our report is available online for those that couldn't get a copy, arenewableamerica.org. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Litchfield. I'm a senior project developer with Iberdrola Renewables. I'm Eric's coworker. As you came into the room, there was a poster with some beautiful giant white wind turbines on it, and that's our project, the Blue Creek Wind Farm. Just briefly about Iberdrola Renewables, we are a leading developer of renewable energy, mostly wind, but we do have some solar projects and some integrated trading and balancing operations in the Pacific Northwest with natural gas, biomass, and wind all working very nicely together. But I'm here actually mostly to represent our partner and customer, Ohio State University, the NCAA football national champion, Ohio State Buckeyes. We built the Blue Creek Wind Farm in northwestern Ohio. It's in Van Wert and Paulding counties. It is a big project, 152 wind turbines, 304 megawatts. Combined, it can produce enough electricity for about 76,000 average Ohio homes per year. We're in parts of 6 different townships and 4 school districts. It's a tremendous local benefit to that community, which is talked about in Ryan's report. And fundamentally, the way I see it, I'm from Darke County, Ohio. It's a new agricultural product. We fit in corn and soybean and wheat fields. We don't take up much room, less than an acre per wind turbine. The wind is howling over the fields, whether you put up wind turbines or not. Might as well put them up, generate some electricity, new revenue for landowners. We have 250 different landowners that are part of our project, and new revenue for the schools and counties and townships, and it's significant. But I mainly want to talk about Ohio State University. They are our customer. There's a great quote I'm going to start with from our friend Scott Potter, Senior Energy Advisor, and he says, we invested in this project for 5 reasons. 1 is economics, 2 is because it's the right thing to do, 3 is economics, 4 is because we're the most comprehensive energy research center in the world, and 5 is economics. So you can see the focus there. Ohio State this is a great story here because they have a long-term viewpoint. We've seen a lot of changes recently, but I think we can probably all agree Ohio State University is still going to be here in 20 years. They're still going to be educating students and using electricity and other energy sources in the process. What's it going to cost? It's impossible to say unless you can lock in prices for 20 years, which you can do with renewable energy because there is no fuel price and thus no fuel volatility. So they like the stability of it. They like the cleanliness of it. They have a goal to get to carbon neutrality, and this gets them a big part of that way. And the other big economic portion, of course, is it's affordable. The bottom line number I want to make sure everyone knows from this report is Ohio State University has saved $4 million already by buying wind power. Wind power is not more expensive. That's terrific. They buy 50 megawatts from our wind farm, or about 25 turbines worth of power. That supplies 20 to 25% of their campus. Some fun facts about that. For the first 12 months of their contract, the university was fully powered by the wind farm for 1,100 hours, so about an eighth of the year. And last January, when it was really windy and really cold, and there were peak demands for energy and peak pricing for energy, they were 44% powered by the wind farm throughout the month. They saved a significant amount of money just in that month, and that's a really important anecdote that wind energy can save money and provide power when it's needed. So one final thing to mention is that, of course, they are one of the foremost research institutions, and stay tuned for some research that we will be doing with them. They'll have access to the wind farm, and they will be researching all manner of topics from engineering, economics, marketing. I hope to do a lot of different things, and that's really how our partnership began. We donated some Met towers to the university, and they're using the towers we used to measure the wind data to see how windy the wind site was. They're using to do forestry research, actually. So that's what I have to say. Thanks.
Okay, I'm John Syriac with Go Sustainable Energy. We're an energy efficiency consulting firm, and I love coming to events like this because one of the big pros for energy efficiency that most people know is it saves a lot of money. And so often the counter argument for that then is, why do we need energy efficiency programs? Why, if it saves so much energy, why doesn't everyone just do it on their own? And I don't know what it feels like in the back there, but up here it feels a bit like an ice box. I mean, it is really cold, and so I'll tell you this: it does energy efficiency saves a lot of money. It's way more difficult than you might think. And I don't think the folks that own this facility are wasting their money to make you uncomfortable on purpose. They didn't wake up today and say, you know what a good business strategy is? Throw money out the window and make everyone who comes in feel like they're frozen. But this is energy inefficiency. And so it turns out it's a lot harder than you think to make things energy efficient. So thank you, Cold Air, for making my point for me. So we're talking about positioning Ohio to lead, and I'm wondering who's going to lead us, and what exactly are we positioning for? And I think it's the future of power. And when I think of the future of power, to me, the future of power is behind the meter, if that makes sense. It's small distributed resources. It's things like energy efficiency, which, believe it or not, you can, behind the curtain in the electric markets, a negawatt competes with a megawatt. It can get paid the same. It pushes prices down. It's energy efficiency. It's demand response. That's behind the meter. It's things like combined heat and power at manufacturing plants, or rooftop solar, or even windmills at manufacturing plants, wind turbines. And so the future's there, and I think businesses are leading. Businesses know this. There is a lot of minds and private capital and venture capital going into this new energy economy, this future. It's just not necessarily coming here to this state. And so we should think about that, that there is a lot of money coming in from private pockets, but we're not necessarily attracting it here in Ohio. But businesses know it's part of the future. The other demographic that knows the future of power is behind the meter are young adults. Okay, so one thing Ohio has going for it is a great higher education system, and we attract the best and brightest from around the world to our universities, including our energy programs. We have a number of elite programs here in the state. University of Dayton, where I came out of, I had to mention that since you mentioned the Buckeyes. We also beat, anyways. That program has, I think recently had 5 Fulbrights in their energy program from around the world. Okay, so we can attract the talent here. And then if you want to look at the future, okay, that's what's drawing the brains. And where do those people go? They do what I do when I graduated a while back, which is they get right out of this state. All right, when I graduated, my determination was there's no jobs for what I want to work on here, so I left the state. I came back because, you know, I'm stubborn and foolish and I love Ohio. But, you know, but as a business owner, what I'm seeing is a lot of the best and brightest are saying, they're like, look, we can read the tea leaves. There's no career for me in this state, and they leave. And public policymakers and everyone else should think about that too. So we've got good and bad and ugly. Like, the good is there is still investment. There are still businesses around. Bad is we're losing talent. Other bad things, and we get into ugly, is we need to think about competition here. That's a word we like in Ohio. We favor competition. And if you think of electric generation, we've had over 100 years of no competition, of regulated monopolies where you have a captured customer base and guaranteed profit. And we're moving towards competition. And when you do that, what you find is that if you have a big asset, like a multi-billion-dollar power plant, eventually you have to start to wonder, are these too big to fail? Are they going to come to the state and the regulatory agencies and say, we need a bailout? Because that's what's happening right now in the state. We have 60-year-old assets where they're saying, you got to bail us out. We need more money. And so if we're going to invest in the past, we're investing in monopolies. And if we're going to go to the future, we're investing in markets and competition, because all of our resources, we're small enough to fail. That's a weird selling point, but if Mark goes bankrupt, no one cares. If I go bankrupt, no one cares. Dan, I don't know if everyone cares about Dan, but you know, we're small enough to fail. So are we going to move to competitive markets and competitive technologies, or are we going to retrench into monopolies? We also need to think about low-cost resources and cost control. And this has been a debate in Ohio, is how much do these resources cost? And why do you need to ask utilities to buy them? But we also have to think of, if you're a utility, you know, before you buy your electricity, the utility does, or someone does, the grid. And are they incented to buy low-cost renewable energy or energy efficiency or demand response, or are they incented to buy higher cost power from their own power plants? All right, you need to think about it. Give me a yes. So we've talked about customer cost control. Let me give you a couple fun facts, leave you with a couple fun facts, if you could call them fun facts. We were supposed to control costs this past year on energy efficiency. And did we control costs on energy efficiency? It turns out efficiency programs save much more in money than they cost, but you should still look at the cost and make sure we're paying an appropriate amount. And what we didn't do was disaggregate that, and it never really came out well that the profit margin for a utility on those programs is about 28%. So they have a guaranteed customer base. They don't have to compete with anyone. They have no risk in their investment. I don't get any of that. They are providing a valuable service, but then they get 28% profit. And then they change the law saying we need to do cost control. Well, whose costs are we controlling? And if you point this out, how much profit they take, they'll call you an extremist. I got that in an email today. Yeah. Another fun fact, if you're in First Energy territory, this year, First Energy territory will experience an additional $500 million, that's $500 million, B word, in electricity costs, because First Energy didn't take their efficiency resource and bid it into these competitive electric markets that are kind of behind the curtain to the average person. So you're going to pay $500 million more. So are we really lowering costs in Ohio? Do we really care about that if we let that happen? $500 million. And so a business in First Energy territory, when they get to that in the middle of this year, they're going to look at their bills and they're going to say, oh my gosh, my bills are going way up. Let me turn to energy efficiency programs to help me control these costs. And guess what? They're not there anymore. First Energy realized they've got $500 million at stake. They pulled out the plug from their efficiency program. And so what's happening for us is we have customers coming to us saying, where's the efficiency program? Because I'm still paying for it. You can look on the tariff, and we actually had a customer whose costs paying into the program tripled this year as the programs got pulled. And there's a lot of nuances as to why that happens, but let me tell you one reason, one little bit as to why that might triple. First Energy is spending $6 million of ratepayer money to capture efficiency from customers without compensation. Okay, capture without compensation. Some parties call that unconstitutional. And they're recovering $6 million from the ratepayers to do that. I have 0 minutes left. So I wanted to say there's good, there's bad, that's ugly. We've got some ugly things going on in the state. I think the businesses are moving forward, but we need policies and regulations where the customers get to see the cost savings from the technologies and the business models that private investment is putting into place. I'll end there.
Again, I think from that panel, it's continuing on the theme of the first panel into sort of transformation of our energy economy, and then what is the new energy economy, and what's that going to be? Well, it's going to be jobs. It's going to be exciting opportunities for sort of the next generation of engineers and scientists and public advocates. And I think when some of us started doing this back in the 2000s, I know there's people who have been doing it for a lot longer than that, you know, one of the concerns was, oh, if we do all this renewables and energy efficiency, what's that going to do to energy jobs? Well, what it's doing is creating new jobs, exciting jobs, and jobs that I think the people that are coming into the workforce now really want to do. So with that, do we have any questions for this esteemed panel? Yes, sir, right there.
So the topic is positioning Ohio to lead. So we're now leading as the first state to roll back. And I take objection when anybody says that 310 was a freeze, because it's not a freeze, it's a rollback, which was lobbied heavily by the power utilities that have now said, and they lobbied for that because they said, well, we want a free market. We want to be able to compete and do whatever we want to do. And now they're asking for, as was astutely stated, a bailout for not just coal, but nuclear power as well, because, gee, we can't compete. We need help. We need more money. And now other states are taking the cue because of what was some brothers came into the state of Ohio, may have influenced the politicians, but we won't get into that. The question is, so where are we going with our current political position at this point, and what can be done?
Yeah, well, I'm not an elected leader, so I don't know. I think it's muddy. I think, you know, if you look at past, just a couple years ago, we had good dialogue on energy issues in the state. Senate Bill 221 passed with only 1 vote against it in the House and Senate. The governor had Senate Bill 315 that had bipartisan support, and there was good dialogue, and then the dialogue just kind of broke apart. So if I was a public policy person, that would be a big concern to me. As a business leader, you know, what I'm asking to myself is, who is going to lead? Someone needs to lead. And what I'm finding is that there's other businesses and community leaders who are willing to lead. I see some of them in the audience. And so, you know, that's, for me, my decisions on who's going to lead, and I'll work with them.
What I wanted to add was that the project, the first development activities that became our Blue Creek Wind Farm began in Indiana. And predecessors of mine envisioned the project being in Indiana. I got involved in 2008, and Senate Bill 221 was passed, and I said to our management, hey, why don't we shift our efforts right across the border, because there'll be a market we can compete into. So we did, and it led to this big investment. And we have other projects we'd like to develop in Ohio. So 310 definitely is a hindrance to that, but there's other things that well, the budget bill, House Bill 483, changed the setback requirements for wind turbines. And that's honestly even more challenging. So we have other projects we'd like to develop, like Blue Creek in Ohio, and they are very, very, very challenged to be able to move forward right now.
Dave, can you elaborate on that setback? A lot of people may not be familiar with it.
Yeah, there's a lot of rules that have to be complied with to build a wind farm. You don't just show up and do it. State permitting process took us 9 months, a couple $1 million of engineering studies and permitting studies, and like a 5,000-page application. One of the key metrics is distances where you place turbines from houses, from property lines, and they need to be a reasonable and prudent distance so that the wind turbines are good neighbors to people who live there. And that's been the experience of our project. We exceeded the requirements that were in place at the time, and the project is more or less fitting in well with residents of the area. The setbacks have recently been changed dramatically for non-leased property lines. There's a lot of details I don't think are worth getting into, but the point is that it effectively is blocking future projects from moving forward.
And just to
Go ahead. And Ryan, while you're at it, why don't you just tell us a little bit in the context of some of the stuff you looked at in other states?
Oh, sure.
As it relates to this.
Yeah.
And then I promise we get there's a lot of people who want to ask questions, so we'll get this, and then we'll get to the other folks in the audience. I promise.
Yeah, so we did an Ohio report. We did 7 other state reports over the last few months. And so we had a chance to look at a variety of different markets. In addition to Ohio, we looked at Michigan and Minnesota. We looked at Oregon and Washington, Nebraska, New York, Nevada. So one interesting trend, maybe to partially answer your question, is that in order to position your state to lead, there is an interesting new trend among large companies, Fortune 500 companies, large institutions, colleges and universities. There's an increased preference for purchasing and investing in renewable energy. Costs have come down dramatically. Costs for solar have dropped 40% in the last 10 years. Costs for wind have dropped 50% in the last 5 years. So it's now economically competitive for these large purchasers to buy renewable energy. Large data centers, big IT companies are looking to site their data centers in markets where they can purchase renewable energy. That's a huge, in our report, we had terrific conversation with the head of renewable energy for General Motors. And the thing he leads with is that the reason they keep investing in solar is because it makes economic sense. They wouldn't do it otherwise. And so that's a key piece to consider as you're positioning your state to lead. The Fortune 500, the Fortune 100 are all interested in purchasing renewable energy at scale.
Okay, we're going to go with the gentleman in the back with the glasses first, and then we'll go to this gentleman next. Yes, sir.
The question is about offshore wind as well as onshore wind. In the United States, we are not looking into do offshore wind. The economics are very different than onshore wind, and I wish those folks in that team well, but we're seeing really, really cost competitive prices from onshore wind farms, not to mention solar in some markets. The numbers just aren't there for offshore. So while some of the characteristics of the energy markets in Europe that have led to offshore are much different than they are here, and our parent company is doing some offshore in Europe. I personally don't think I'll be spending much of my time doing that here.
Gentleman right here.
Well, I'm not a scientist, but I've heard that the climate is changing. So I prefer to call it climate disruption, actually. But my question pertains to solar and wind particularly. And in Ohio, what kind of changes will you have to adapt to because of climate change? There are more extreme storms, possibly warmer temperatures, things like that. And so what kind of risk mitigation things are you putting in place?
That's a good question. We do a lot of meteorological study before we build to really quantify the wind resource. We had 7 different towers and a SODAR system and a laser system to measure wind in Ohio before we built. I don't know if we anticipate. We are seeing strong storms. The wind turbines are designed for. And they operate between 8 and 55 mile per hour winds. They can withstand wind speeds much higher than that. And when they were tested severely with the derecho windstorm we had in Ohio 2 years ago, 110 mile per hour winds at our site. And we had farmers who lost grain bins and barns, and our wind turbines were not damaged. So I think there's a comfortable margin of safety built in and engineered into our facilities, and I hope that continues to be proven.
Let's see, I think it was this gentleman here and then the gentleman behind him next.
I was wondering, and then I guess it's a question for Dan, in those hours where 100% of Ohio State's University electric load came from your wind farm, how were they able to make that decision? Did they have, or did you have the resources to tell them on some kind of hourly or daily basis that there's going to be a lot of output from that location, and therefore they could utilize for that? I guess they were 1,100 hours, 100% of the generation from the wind farm for the campus.
Yeah, well, a knock that people will put on our technology is that it's, it varies. Sometimes it's not windy, sometimes it's windy. Well, that's obvious, but it's also forecastable, and the forecasts are becoming increasingly accurate. So if you are an energy geek like me, you can go to PJM eData online, and you can see what wind energy is doing in the PJM grid right now. And the chart shows instantaneous generation right next to predicted generation. So you can manage that. And the other key point I'll make about that is that, setting aside Ohio State, demand is variable too. So a little bit of variable generation is no problem to integrate in a grid that is designed to accommodate wild swings in demand, as well as generation from traditional plants as well. Yeah, there's needs for backup power, whether there's renewable energy or not.
Yes, sir.
My name's Greg Pace. I'm with Columbus Community Bill of Rights. So I have 2 sons that live in Guernsey County, and they grew up there, which is fracking central right now, basically. It's kind of that, we're watching that end of Ohio turn into something that it really wasn't, something that was old as we did it back in the past. The only jobs that they can find right now is basically, one of my sons just got hired by a trucking company. He's going to be driving water and sand around. And here they still understand the good and the bad aspects of fracking, but there's no jobs around there. There's like 143,000, I think, last year solar jobs in this country. Most of them full-time. It's growing like 15% a year, the jobs, as I understand the statistics. Is there any focus on trying to get renewable manufacturing companies out kind of in that end of Ohio to create more jobs out there? Because that's where the future really is going to be once our dinosaurs in the state house figure it out. But does anybody know of any kind of push to get those kinds of jobs out in that area?
Yeah, let me address this, and maybe John has some addition as well. But my understanding is there was a report, the State Commission, that showed there are 31,000 clean energy jobs in Ohio now, which is great. Our wind farm has 20 new jobs, not a huge number, but they're very highly skilled, relatively highly paid jobs in a rural community. Got to be people good with mechanical systems, electrical systems, computer systems, in good shape and not afraid of heights. So it's a tough skill set. We work with a local vocational school and career center to create a wind technician training program in Van Wert. So local people can get local training and enter this industry, which I hope continues to grow. And I know there's a lot more jobs in solar as well as energy efficiency.
Yeah, I guess I'd just add, from the energy efficiency perspective, right? There's 30-some thousand jobs around energy efficiency in Ohio. And when you trade off power, what you're putting in place of it is material, it is manufactured goods. And so most of those 30,000 jobs are at manufacturers. My company has 11 of them, but there's however many more at Mark's Place where they manufacture. There's a lot at Owens Corning, GE, the Emerson plants, places like Copeland, and then lots of other manufacturers that make the nuts and bolts and the pieces and parts that go into advanced energy goods. So there's so many companies that are involved in this that it's actually hard for me to say, which ones are over in that part of the state. But I think there's absolutely potential in the manufacturing base Ohio has to attract more manufacturers into the supply chain for these goods. I think it's very good for the manufacturing sector to have advanced energy to invest in.
Okay, this is going to be the last question for this panel, and then we're going to move on to the final panel, and that is the gentleman back there, I believe.
So I'm a student at Ohio State University, and I'm intrigued about your discussion with the next generation of scientists, engineers. What do you think students can do to really push renewable energy forward? Maybe ideas like research opportunities to do that.
I think I'm the one that brought it up, so I'll start. Well, I think the most important thing is to think creatively, right? So students, I think young people have a different view of the world and don't have the inertia and don't have the way it's been built into the mindset. That was the case for me. So I think you have a freedom of how to think that other people maybe don't have. And that's probably the most important thing, is to contribute yourself. I think 2 and 3, I would seek out the companies that are in Ohio if you're interested in staying in Ohio, because there are companies like mine that hire Ohioans. I just did. And then the number 3 thing is go talk to the policymakers. Young adults don't come out to the State House that much, and so I think it makes a difference if you can show up and say, this is what everyone's interested in. We'd like to stay here, but if there aren't the policies in place, me and my friends are going to a different state. I think that would resonate.
Thanks, everybody, for the tremendous questions for that panel. Thank you, panel. And we're going to bring up our third